Season's greetings. The President earlier today signed the budget presented to him by his senior special assistant, Senate on National Assembly, Senator Babajide Omorare, at the Council Chamber of the Presidential Villa in Abuja. He was, however, displeased with some changes as well as major additions and reductions which made by the National Assembly in critical projects without justification. President Buhari highlighted some of the worrisome changes in the budget to include an increase in projected federal government independent revenue by 400 billion naira, reduction in the provision for sinking funds to retire maturing bonds by 22 billion, and reduction of the provisions for the non-regular allowances of the Nigerian Police Force and the Nigerian Navy by 15 billion and 5 billion naira respectively, all without any explanation. He also expressed his reservations on the inclusion of new provisions totaling 36.59 billion naira for National Assembly's projects in the service-wide vote, which he said negated the principles of separation of powers and financial autonomy of the legislative arm of government. The President was also concerned about the changes to the original executive proposal in the form of new insertions, outright removals, reductions and/or increases in the amounts allocated to projects, as well as reduction of the provisions made for as many as 10,733 projects and the introduction of 6,576 new projects into the budget. According to him, most of the projects inserted relate to matters that are basically the responsibilities of state and local governments and do not appear to have been properly conceptualized, designed and costed. President Buhari said he would revert to the National Assembly with a request for an amendment as soon as the lawmakers return from their recess to ensure that critical ongoing projects cardinal to his administration do not suffer a setback as a result of reduced funding. He recounted that during the presentation of the 2022 appropriation bill, he stated that the 2022 fiscal year will be very crucial in his administration's efforts to complete and put to use critical agenda projects, as well as improve the general living conditions of Nigerians. The President insisted that the cuts by the lawmakers could render the implementation of the budget impossible. Now, what is the wisdom behind the adjustments made by the National Assembly, and what effect will this have on the implementation of the budget generally? These issues will be the focus on the program Nigeria Today. I am Lydia Odijochi. Welcome to the program and the last episode for this year. With me in the studio to discuss the signing of the 2022 appropriation bill into law is a regular, Jide Ojo, a public affairs analyst. Welcome to Nigeria Today.
It's a pleasure. Happy New Year in advance.
Happy New Year to you too in advance. Okay, now let me go on straight to my questions. What are some of the major takeaways on the 2022 budget as signed by Mr. President earlier today?
Well, thank you very much, and season's greetings to our viewers. Major takeaway is that once again, Nigeria has kept, the Buhari administration has kept to its promise of returning Nigeria to January to December financial year. And I think that was the rationale that made the president to sign on the very last day, despite the worrisome insertions and cuts and all of that. So the president didn't want to upset the apple cart by throwing it back to the National Assembly for corrections to be made before he will append his signature. So that's one major takeaway. Second takeaway is that despite the purported costly relationship between the executive and the legislative arm, there is still some level of miscommunication and mutual distrust. I say that advisedly because if what we were told by the President of the Senate, Dr. Ahmed Lawan, is anything to go by that, the President's wish will always be granted. I do not understand why they decided to distort the budget, as it were. Because like you said in your background, the President is expressing a lot of worry that this budget 2022 may not be implementable. Even for 2021 budget, we do know that revenue projections were not met due to certain variables, including COVID-19, insecurity, and a host of other factors. So how then do you increase the budget size of 16 trillion and put it at 17 trillion with over 735 billion added to the budget? Yes, the National Assembly take out with oil benchmark, but do we have control over the oil benchmark? The President tried to be conservative by not be over-ambitious, but National Assembly obviously do not, it's not on the same page with the President, which is where they decided to act to jack up the oil benchmark.
Okay.
So, given all of this, I think a lot still needs to be done to smoothen the existing relationship between the federal executive and the legislative arm of government.
Okay, the point you just raised leads me to my next question. The National Assembly, like you said, raised the total 2022 budget figure from the proposed 16.391 trillion naira to 17.126 trillion naira. What impact, in your opinion, will some of the adjustments made by the National Assembly have on the budget implementation?
As the President has rightly pointed out, it's going to have a negative impact because the executive conceptualize this budget and they know what their priority areas are. Look at the issue of the 15 billion deduction from the police budget and 5 billion from that of the Navy. Just last week, the President promised that by January 2022, Nigerian Police Force will have 20% increase in their wages. Now, this 15 billion shortfall will definitely impact on the payment of this emolument. Likewise, that of the Navy. But beyond that, it's also the critical infrastructure, like in the second Niger bridge, that the President felt he was going to ensure the completion. According to what the Minister of Information and Culture said yesterday in Lagos, it's 78% completed. And one will expect that this remaining 22% will be done in 2022, so that by early first quarter of 2023, the President can commission it, and that will be part of the achievement.
Okay.
There are other critical infrastructure from which money were deducted, including from some ministries, departments, and agencies. Now you also added approximately 1,500 new projects that were not designed, that were not conceptualized. And like the President said, these are projects that are best handled by state and local government. So if you now want to use federal allocation to fund projects that belong to state and local government, then it's at variance, and it shows that the President and the National Assembly leadership are not actually on the same page. And now, the father of them all is the non-implementation of this budget. Because, you know, budgeting leader has become an all ritual in Nigeria. Every state, almost all the state governments have signed their 2022 budget. In fact, in many of the state assembly, it's the same way the governor sent it to them that they returned it. But this budget was sent to the National Assembly on October 7th, and now was passed last week, and the President is signing it this week. But yes, while the President's assent is very key, how do you ensure proper implementation? revenue projection has been jacked up. So, how do you fund it? Through borrowing or what? Already Nigerians are crying that the borrowing by this administration is too excessive. It's excessive. And Nigerians, I mean, from Fox Pop, are expressing doubt that maybe at some point in time in the nearest future, China might seize some of our national assets. God forbid. But if we are not able to service our debt, because part of what the National Assembly did was to also reduce the sinking fund for payment of matured bonds, which then means that we may not be able to meet our interest payment to our debtors, or is it our creditors, as they say. So what that means is that, recall that in 2021, the money earmarked for debt servicing was about 3 trillion. And now, if there is no sufficient money earmarked for that debt servicing, it then means that there will be compound interest charged on those debts. We then will spike the penalty. And this will have long-term implications because our national assets may be taken over, may be forfeited, depending on the wordings and terms and conditions of this debt. So when you look at the ripple effect, I think, in my own estimation, much as I align that the National Assembly has power to tinker with the budget, it should not be in a way that will distort the entire plan of the executive arm, who actually conceptualized this. And this has also brought up the argument that there needs to be needs assessment before budget formulation is carried out. Need assessment and also consultation with the leadership of National Assembly so that they are on the same page. And this kind of jacking, okay, how do they want federal government to raise the 735 billion which they have put on top of what the president projected? And we know COVID-19 is still real. We know that productivity is still suboptimal. We know that we are still challenged by insecurity. We know that many of the revenue projections are never met. So why increase the budget? Are we just doing it for the sake of, for the sake of doing it, or are we doing it because we meant to have? So I saw, when I read the press statement issued by Senior Special Assistant to the President of Media and Publicity, that many of these things that were done to distort the budget were without explanation. One would have expected that there would be, accompanying the budget, a budget note. There's something called budget note, which then will say, that column will tell you, the reason why we are doing this, increasing the benchmark, is because our research or our whatever has shown that there will be increase in the price of crude oil next year. We are reducing the money meant for this particular MDA because we felt it is bloated, or there were no rationale. So that in itself makes the thought behind those alterations or distortions not to be patriotic.
It's okay now. In fact, it's a very big topic that we need to talk more on, and we'll take a break now so that we can delve into some of these issues. Stay with us.
This is NTA News 24 broadcasting from Abuja. You can watch us anywhere, anytime on the following platforms. For more information, log on to our website www.nta.ng or join us on our social media handles, Facebook at NTA News 24.
For comments, suggestions and inquiries, send an email to news24@nta.gov.ng or call us on the following numbers.
NTA News 24, news and more news.
Welcome back. The program is Nigeria Today, and we are discussing the signing of the 2022 appropriation bill into law. And stay with me here is Jide Ojo, a public affairs analyst. Now, let's talk about recurrent and capital expenditures. What is your expert view on the provision for these two key areas in the 2022 budget? And what are your observations on them? And what would you have recommended differently?
Well, my own expert opinion is that our capex, that's capital expenditure vis-a-vis the recurrent, is still lopsided in favor of the recurrent. And our overhead is still unwieldy. Yes, I would have loved to see a 50-50 capital expenditure and then recurrent 50%. But right now we are running like 70-30. And that's 70 in favor of the recurrent expenditure. And I think, Lydia, I think it's high time we reduce our overhead spending. And overhead there does not mean salaries and wages. I'm talking of all these frivolous expenses, welfare, entertainment, needless travels, medical tourism. We can do a lot. We can cut a lot of flesh from some of these overhead expenses. I mean, what is the whole essence? Did you hear, Lydia, did you hear that a US president pays for the meals of his guests, even in White House? If you invite a guest to come and visit you in White House, as the guest is leaving, they are bringing bill for that guest. You have to pay. I've watched Michelle Obama's video on a show where she told the world that sometimes they find it difficult to invite guests to White House because they have to pay. But in our own case, people go see presidents, even coming with their loved ones and all of that, and all of them will be entertained at the behest of the state. All of these expenses need to stop. Okay. What is welfare? What is entertainment? The amount of money spent on newspaper and periodicals, all of this, we can cut down substantially on the cost, running cost. I'm not talking of people not getting their ESTA code or their travel allowance, but even the travels must be justified.
Exactly.
I mean, you don't have to do foreign travel for everything. Why don't you invite the experts to Nigeria so that more people can benefit from such trainings? And research have even shown that when many of the public servants goes on this overseas training, many of them don't even stay at the training venue. They go shopping. So why don't we find, because they are supposed to be austerity measure. Don't forget, our budget is still, we are running deficit budgeting. It's not optimal and it's not over. So we are running deficit. It's like somebody who says in 2022 I'm going to spend 200,000. But your honey is 80,000. So you are going to borrow 120,000. If you are going to borrow that 120,000, shouldn't you spend it wisely? Should you spend it to entertain friends and relations, marry a new wife, or carry girlfriend, or drink beer, or buy suya? I mean, you should look at, okay, I want to build a new house. I need to change my car. Car is a necessity, it's not a luxury. But for you to now do frivolous things of throwing parties or clubbing or doing frivolous things, that's the way, realistic. That's the best analogy I could give to what Nigeria is doing with some of our overhead expenditure. Okay. And we need to cut down reasonably and sizably on that.
Now, how realistic is the increase of oil benchmark price of crude oil from $57 to $62 in this year's budget, as OPEC came up with anything, and also the uncertainties that could come up with the COVID-19 pandemic? What are your thoughts about this?
My sister, you see, that's why I'm saying, what is the rationale? I wish there is a budget note that gives us the reason why some of these alterations were made. Because we all know Nigeria NCDC, Nigeria Center for Disease Control, has said that officially Nigeria is in the 4th wave of COVID-19. In many other countries, they are in the 5th wave. More hospitalization, fatalities. We are talking of Omicron. I think I read something somewhere that there is another variant apart from Omicron now. So in all of this, you are still projecting, you are still increasing by about $5 from $57 to $62 per barrel. What assurances do you have that the price of crude oil will sell at 62? And even if it sells at 62, shouldn't you be having savings? Shouldn't we be? Because we call something foreign. There's something like foreign where you save money, excess crude account. So money that is in excess of your budget benchmark is saved on that, and then sovereign wealth fund. These are areas that you could have saved whatever is in excess of what the president has put as benchmark. But when you now increase it by another $5, it then means that even if the price of crude in 2022 sells for $62, you are not going to have any savings. You are going to be consuming everything that you get. And don't also forget, apart from the crude oil benchmark, what assurance do we have that will meet our OPEC quota? You know, there was a time in this country where, because of the volatility and the restiveness in the Niger Delta region, our budget benchmark of $2.3 million barrels per day could not be met. We were doing like 1.5 million barrels per day. So even if the price was 62 and you are not able to meet the demand of the market, your revenue will still be less.
Definitely.
So I think there isn't much wisdom in the tinkering that the National Assembly has done. And I'm glad the President of the Senate and the Speaker of House of Reps were there at the budget signing ceremony, and they heard it directly from the President that he has some worries about what they did. Okay. I don't think it was done in the best interest of the country.
Okay, now just as a roundup, what would be your advice to both the executive and the legislature?
They need to have a consultation, a roundtable, beyond the president just sending them an amendment. I think that there should be proper consultation this time around to be sure that whatever is needed to be done on the amendment that the president has said he will sponsor once the National Assembly resumed, that they are on the same page and this amendment is passed expeditiously. Because if it's not done, don't forget, next year is going to be a political year. It's not an election year, but there will be a lot of politicking. So if they don't deal with the passing the amendments to the 2022 budget, we may find ourselves in soup. And don't also forget, last year I recall that the budget for 2020 was brought down, was reduced because of COVID-19. In fact, many states also have to sponsor amendment to their appropriation law because of the unenvisaged eventuality of COVID-19. So that should have guided the National Assembly rather than increasing the budget size. They can move things around and ensure that critical infrastructures were not affected. Okay. But I would expect the president to have a one-to-one consultation with the leadership of the National Assembly so that this amendment, when it is sent to them, will be passed expeditiously.
We hope so too. That's it on our tonight's edition of Nigeria Today. Jide Ojo, a public affairs analyst, we really appreciate you for sharing your thoughts with us on our topic tonight. We appreciate your insight. We also thank our viewer for always being there. Don't forget you can also watch this and other editions of the program on youtube.com/NTA News 24 Hub. See you next year. I'm Lydia Odijochi. Bye-bye. Happy New Year.